A seismic rift has just opened within the most traditional circles of the Catholic Church. On one side, a former Vatican diplomat and archbishop. On the other, a respected Swiss bishop. Both are known as staunch defenders of orthodoxy. Yet, they have reached completely opposite conclusions about a single, explosive act. The SSPX's plan to consecrate bishops without the Pope's permission. Archbishop Carlo Maria Viganò declares his full support, calling it a necessary act for the good of souls. Bishop Marian Eleganti condemns it as a definitive schismatic act. This isn't just an argument. It's a window into the deepest crisis facing Catholicism today. When does fidelity to tradition itself become an act of rebellion? And what does a faithful Catholic do when the highest authorities seem to be failing? Let's break down this theological showdown. Archbishop Viganò's support hinges on a powerful, centuries-old Catholic principle, the state of necessity and the supreme law, which is the salvation of souls, salus animarum. His argument, shared by the SSPX and commentators like canonist Mark Lambert, follows this logic. 1. The crisis is real. Viganò believes the Church's hierarchy is complicit in the demolition of the Church. He points to the promotion of synodality, which he calls schismatic, and a perceived double standard where the Vatican is tough on traditionalists but accommodating to progressive drift or even a communist-appointed bishops in China. 2. The law has a purpose. Canon law exists to serve the faith and save souls. Viganò and SSPX defenders argue that when applying a law, like needing papal mandate for bishops, would frustrate its very purpose by causing the collapse of traditional sacramental life for thousands. The letter of the law may not bind. This is an appeal to epikeia, a principle of equitable interpretation. 3. The precedent of 1988. He states, nothing has changed since 1988. Implying that if Archbishop Lefebvre's controversial consecrations were arguably necessary then, the dramatically worsened situation today makes them even more so. In short, Viganò views this not as disobedience, but as a tragic, last resort act of preservation of the apostolic succession and sacraments in a time of emergency. Bishop Eleganti's condemnation is equally rooted in firm Catholic doctrine and canon law. His core argument is about the visible, canonical unity of the Church. 1. The nature of the Church. Eleganti stresses that the Church founded by Christ is visibly realized in unity with the Pope. This unity isn't just a spiritual idea or praying for the Pope. It must be realized concretely by refraining from acts of canonical disobedience. Consecrating bishops without a papal mandate is the very definition of such an act. 2. No justification for schism. He firmly rejects the state of necessity argument here. While he himself criticizes liturgical reforms and some conciliar documents, he states that shortcomings do not legitimize establishing a parallel hierarchy. He draws a crucial distinction. You can criticize the Pope's prudential judgments, but you cannot usurp his fundamental jurisdictional authority. 3. The historical warning. Eleganti cites the saints of the 4th century, like Athanasius and Basil, who fought for orthodoxy against heresy and imperial pressure. They never broke communion with Rome. Their example, for Eleganti, proves that true faithfulness means enduring suffering within the Church, not separating from it, no matter how grave the crisis. For Eleganti, the SSPX's move isn't preservation. It's the creation of a Church alongside the Church, which is the essence of schism. This clash reveals a fundamental, painful divergence among traditionalists on how to be faithful in a perceived time of crisis. Two different weights on the scale. Both sides appeal to supreme values. Viganò weighs salvation of souls and doctrinal purity as so heavy that they can temporarily suspend canonical norms. Eleganti weighs visible communion with the See of Peter as an indispensable, non-negotiable element of the Church itself, without which the saved souls aren't fully in the Church. The reform of the reform versus separate sanctuary. This debate maps onto a broader split. Eleganti represents the Benedict XVI path, work for a reform of the reform from within, healing the liturgy and doctrine while maintaining full communion. Viganò, and arguably the SSPX leadership, seem to have lost faith in that project, advocating for a separate sanctuary to preserve the tradition untouched. The practical fallout for the faithful. This leaves ordinary traditional Catholics in a terrible bind. Whose judgment do they trust? Is attending an SSPX chapel an act of heroic fidelity or of gradual separation? This decision forces laypeople to make their own canonical and theological judgments, a deeply unsettling position. The critical insight. The fight is no longer simply traditionalists versus the modernists. It is now traditionalists versus traditionalists over the most fundamental question of ecclesiology. What is the Church, and where is she found in times of storm? This drama doesn't exist in a vacuum. Commentators like John Henry Weston note the glaring double standard. The Vatican has not issued excommunications against Chinese Communist Party appointed bishops who violate the same canon, 1382. This undermines Rome's moral authority in the eyes of critics like Viganò. The unresolved Vatican II question. At the root is the SSPX's rejection of parts of Vatican II, e.g., Nostra Aetate on other religions. They see as contradicting prior dogma, like extra ecclesiam nullisalis. Until this doctrinal tension is resolved, canonical normalization is impossible. A widening schism. Bishop Eleganti is likely correct in his canonical assessment. These consecrations, if carried out, will almost certainly lead to formal excommunications, hardening a temporary separation into a permanent schism. It will also increase pressure on in-communion traditional groups, like the FSSP, to distance themselves, potentially leaving their faithful isolated. The standoff between Viganò and Eleganti is a tragedy for the Catholic Church. It represents the fracturing of a common front for tradition. One man sees a desperate rescue mission. The other sees the launching of a lifeboat that is sailing away from the mother ship. For thoughtful Catholics, this is a moment for prayer, study, and sorrow, not for partisan glee. It demands we ask ourselves, how do we remain unquestionably faithful to the perennial tradition while remaining unquestionably in communion with the Petrine See, especially when those two feel in tension? What do you think? In this painful scenario, does the principle of salvation of souls justify the act, or does Bishop Eleganti's defense of visible unity hold firm? Share your thoughtful reflections in the comments below. If you value these deep dives into the crises shaping modern Catholicism, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. Thanks for watching.